And thank you for joining us for our evening talk on the impact of Brexit on cross-border procurement and supply chains. Just to note before we start that the meeting is being recorded and a link will be sent around following the event. So I'd firstly like to introduce you to our president of Engineers Ireland, Mr. Maurice Buckley. Maurice is an electrical engineering graduate from University College Dublin. He's executive chairman of the OPW, where he is leading large-scale investment programs to improve Ireland's flood defences and public buildings, both modern and heritage. You have a fairly wide remit there, Maurice. As a chartered engineer, Maurice has worked for the Boston Consulting Group in Munich. He's held senior management roles in industry and is the former chief executive of the NSAI, which is National Standards Authority of Ireland. Over to you, Maurice, if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Denise. Yeah, it's great to be here this evening and welcome to everybody attending this event. And very much looking forward to it myself. It's the third in a series of Brexit lectures or Brexit webinars that we're organising in Engineers Ireland. I suppose that the trigger came at the start of my presidential term back in June of last year, when we were still in the thick of deal, no deal, what would happen, and dealing with the crisis facing us. So I set down a challenge to all of the sectors of Engineers Ireland. For those who don't know, the Engineers Ireland, with its 25,000 members, is organised into divisions, technical divisions, matching the sort of disciplines of engineering, and then regions like this, the Northern region, and several other regions around Ireland, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, a few regions abroad that are growing. So they're collectively our sectors. So my challenge to the sectors was, what can we do in the engineering profession? And what can we do in Engineers Ireland through our regions and through our divisions to contribute to three different challenges that were facing us back then and still facing us now. Number one is the pandemic. Obviously, I was full of hope that by Christmas the pandemic might be history and we might be talking about stimulus and investment and everything else. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting close now, and there will be a huge amount of investment as we come out of the COVID pandemic in the UK, in Ireland, in Europe, everywhere in the US as well. So engineering is going to play a huge role in making that investment happen and turn it into productive investment to help reboot the economy very quickly. So Engineers Ireland want to do what we can there, and there's some activities there. Number two is Brexit, which is what we're talking here tonight on. And obviously Brexit is posing huge challenges for companies everywhere in the UK, in Northern Ireland, in Southern Ireland, and challenges, but also opportunities. And at the heart of it all, once again, are engineers, and what can engineers do to help deal with some of the supply chain issues and some of the approvals for new materials, the changes in standards, changes in certification, all of these issues. So looking forward to hear the talk on that tonight. And of course, underlying all of that is sustainability and climate action. And Engineers Ireland declared a climate and biodiversity emergency last year in 2020, along with engineering bodies around the world, and are very focused now. We've been building a sustainability framework within the organization to try and coordinate members' activities and member company activities. And of course, at a time of a lot of stimulus investment now as we come out of COVID, we want to make sure that is green investment, green and digital investment. They're the themes that we've had in Engineers Ireland this year. And as we deal with Brexit as well, and we change the way we work, we're interacting with new customers, new suppliers, new materials. We want to do all that in a green, sustainable context. So the three challenges come together. As I say, particularly for Brexit, one of the things we're doing is a series of 4 lectures, and this is number 3. The Northeastern region started the ball rolling, then the Northwestern region was on last week, and the Northern region now tonight I think will be particularly interesting. So I'm delighted to be here really to just endorse the event, to thank you and the committee, Denise and all your colleagues in the committee for organising this and hosting the event. As I say, I'm looking forward to it, and I hope the participants tonight will get great value from the discussion. So I'll hand back to you, Denise.
Thank you, Maurice. We're delighted to have you here with us tonight. We have 2 speakers lined up this evening. We had 3, but unfortunately one of our speakers was taken unwell at the last minute, so I have to give apologies from David Fry. We will send around the slides after the event, and of course, if anybody has any questions relating to those slides, they can speak to David, so we'll include some contact details from him. So the format for tonight is that each speaker will give a short presentation, and we'll follow that up then with a Q&A session. Maurice, we're going to stick you in the hot seat for the Q&A session, if that's okay as well. So each of our panelists will take part in the Q&A session at the end. Please send through your questions in the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer them during the Q&A following the presentations. So first up this evening, we have Stephen Kelly. Stephen is CEO of Manufacturing NI. Manufacturing NI represent all manufacturing businesses in Northern Ireland, from SMEs to international corporations. That amounts to 5,500 firms, 88,000 employees, and 20 billion of sales at home and abroad. Stephen has had a varied career. Previous roles have included head of strategy and special projects for an international marketing and communications firm, CEO of the Federation of the Retail Licensed Trade in Northern Ireland, and former CEO of Derry City Centre Initiative. Stephen was a member of the BBC Broadcasting Council for Northern Ireland, and he also provided mediation services as an authorised officer for the Parades Commission. In a newspaper article in 2019, Stephen said that the biggest thing that we are facing at the moment is a Brexit done wrong. Little did Stephen know what was to come. None of us did. However, he also said in that very same article that we all need to show some more bravery in life and run towards the challenge rather than avoiding it. So let's see what Stephen has to say about the challenge that is Brexit. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Denise and Maurice, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to try the limit of my engineering experience and share my screen for a second. So hopefully that will work for you all. I'm assuming that everyone can now see that. It's great to be with you this evening, and I just wanted to begin at the beginning, I suppose, which is there's a lot of interest in the Northern Ireland Protocol, a lot of interest in what Brexit means for the island of Ireland, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody to begin with was on the same page. So I'll take you through some slides here that talk about what is the protocol, what does it mean in practice in many respects, and then give you some insight into some survey work that we've been doing on behalf of Manufacturing NI through all the manufacturing companies in Northern Ireland. This hasn't been published yet, so you're getting a kind of sneak peek this evening of the experience that our manufacturers in Northern Ireland have gone through over the first 3 months of the operation of the protocol. Just to make sure everybody knows where we're at, on the 19th of October 2019, some more than 18 months ago now, the UK and the EU concluded its withdrawal agreement, and within that withdrawal agreement there was provisions for what are called the Northern Ireland Protocol. This became UK and indeed EU law on the 1st of February 2020, just as we were all beginning to wonder what this virus in China was all about. But parliaments both in London and in Brussels approved that withdrawal agreement then, and effectively the UK left the EU on that date. That then meant there was a period of adjustment through 2020 that we all collectively hoped would be used as a period to allow businesses to be ready for what would happen come the 1st of January 2021. However, as we all know, as history has told us, rather than actually an adjustment period, that was actually a prolonged negotiation period. And instead of actually having time to prepare for what was coming, there continued to be negotiations in jeopardy right up until, in terms of the protocol, the 10th of December 2020, and in terms of the UK and the EU's future relationship, about 4 o'clock on the Christmas Eve, as everybody was beginning to peel the potatoes for the dinner. But essentially what the protocol was there to do was to remove the need for any physical infrastructure in terms of a border on the island of Ireland, to protect the all-island economy, and to protect the Good Friday Agreement. And both parties openly and collectively agreed to those sets of priorities that resulted in the protocol being put into play and becoming both law in the UK and the EU, as I said, on the 1st of February 2020. Essentially what it means for Northern Ireland is that there's a new status being established for our goods only, so not services, goods only, trading into Northern Ireland and from Great Britain. So in most respects, it is life as normal in terms of our goods and Northern Ireland's position of its goods within the EU's market. So they're meant to freely circulate, and also within the UK's internal market, in that our goods can travel there unhindered. The significant thing was that regardless of the relationship between the UK and the EU in terms of its trade and cooperation agreement, regardless of what that future relationship between the UK and the EU may have been, and indeed is now, and may actually be in the future, this is international law, which means that from the 1st of January this year, things are different in terms of Northern Ireland than would have ordinarily been the case, as people would have experienced between GB and NI, and indeed between NI and Europe. The protocol is governed by a new UK and EU joint committee. Until recently, that was chaired on the UK side by Michael Gove, the Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster, and Maros Šefčovič, who's the Vice President of the European Commission. That's just changed in the last month, and now is Lord Frost, who many watching may remember as the gentleman who took on the UK's end of the negotiation for its free trade agreement with the EU. But that joint committee is there because it recognises that the protocol is a living document. It is open to change and amendment. It is not meant to be there forever. So, for instance, there are many provisions within the protocol that may just fall away. And there are many provisions within the protocol which may be improved, or many provisions within the protocol that need to be added to over time. So this is a living document. And whilst there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of aggravation, and maybe some contention over the last number of months, that's actually the purpose of that joint committee, is actually to look at what issues are emerging and try to resolve them, look at what issues have been resolved, and perhaps remove elements of the protocol that are no longer required. What it means in practice is that Northern Ireland's goods can freely circulate in the EU single market, but that we must remain subject to, oh, don't know why it's jumped ahead there. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. Everything stopped on my end. But the protocol means that our goods can freely circulate in the EU's market. That means that Northern Ireland goods must actually remain subject to the EU single market rules and the VAT rules. So Maurice talked about his past in terms of the NSAI, for instance, and his role in terms of standards. Well, all goods in Northern Ireland must continue to operate to EU standards. And as such, all goods that we manufacture in Northern Ireland must also be subject to that EU standard as well. What it also means is that the stuff that we make in Northern Ireland has unfettered access to the UK's market. So whilst there are controls from GB into NI, there are no controls at all from Northern Ireland into GB. And if I take that from a standards perspective, if you're a manufacturer in GB, in England, Scotland or Wales, you must have what's called a UKCA, a UK conformity assessment. And if those goods, and it's your intention to sell those goods into the EU, you must also get, for instance, the CE marking. However, in a Northern Ireland context, we only require one set of approvals. So our goods that are achieving a CE marking, the UK is committed that there will be no impediment to those goods arriving into the rest of the UK marketplace. So we only require one conformity assessment, whereas our competitors in GB would require two. Obviously, goods made in Ireland and elsewhere, they also have to conform to the UK's assessments. So there may be issues there for Irish manufacturers selling goods into GB once the UK puts in place its full border operating model on the 1st of January next year. What this also means is that Northern Ireland remains part of the UK's customs territory and will benefit from the UK's FTAs. Benefit is doing a lot of heavy lifting there at the moment because the UK is attempting to roll over the deals that the EU has already done. They've not been able to do all of those deals at this point in time, and those deals will continue to land over the next number of months and years. So there is an issue for us right now in that our goods can't benefit from the EU's free trade deals, but can benefit from the UK's, and there's a distance and a gap between the list of both of those trade agreements that are available there. But because we're part of the UK's customs territory, but we must operate under EU rules and follow the EU laws, it means that the UK will actually operate almost as an agent on behalf of the EU, will operate a customs border. And a lot of the contention that you've seen in the media and on the streets, perhaps, in Northern Ireland over the last couple of months is because the UK now has established border control posts for goods arriving into Northern Ireland points of entry at our ports and at our airport. And that is something that people have found quite difficult to accept. But that is the deal that the UK Prime Minister did. That's the deal that the UK Parliament approved. So uniquely, what this means for Northern Ireland is that we have tariff, quota, rules of origin and customs-free trade into the EU and into the GB marketplace. And nowhere else in the world will have and can have and does have that status. So that presents a great opportunity for Northern Ireland, particularly its manufacturers in terms of making goods. The cost of that is obviously that we must follow the EU rules. And the cost of that is that our supply chains and our raw materials that arrive into Northern Ireland through GB on the Irish Sea have to go through those customs controls that didn't exist ever. In fact, going right back to the formation of the United Kingdom itself. As I said, all that began on the 1st of January 2021. However, Brexit really hasn't been visible for the rest of the UK until now. There's lots of conversation, lots of commentary about GB exporters having difficulty getting their goods into the EU marketplace, particularly goods that are foods of animal origin and manufactured goods. But the UK at this point in time is only operating half a border. The border from GB into continental Europe is in place, but the border from continental Europe into GB just simply doesn't exist at this point in time. The plan was that would be fully implemented, that border operating model. So the inbound border into GB would be operational from the 1st of July 2021. But the UK has seen the challenges that have been presented to business in Northern Ireland and to consumers in Northern Ireland. And in an election year where there's a very important election in Scotland next week and in Wales and local government elections across England, the UK has decided to push back the operation of that inbound border until the 1st of January 2022. And that means that GB businesses, GB consumers have really not experienced what Brexit fully looks like at this point in time. Irish exporters to GB haven't really experienced what Brexit looks like until that actually happens as well. So getting your goods into Northern Ireland on an EU to Northern Ireland direction. So from the Republic of Ireland into Northern Ireland, absolutely no change. Everything should remain as it was on the 31st of December 2020. So today, on the 31st of December 2020, should look pretty much the same. EU into Northern Ireland via the land bridge in Great Britain. We can operate under the transit rules, the T2 TAD documents. So you can send goods from Brussels to Belfast via Dover and won't have to go through the full controls and just operate under transit. And again, that's the same principle in terms of NI into or GB into NI via Dublin can operate under those transit operations. And then also EU to Northern Ireland ex-GB, again, no change. Those systems are as they were. On a Northern Ireland into Great Britain and into the EU, again, no change. It is exactly as it was on the 31st of December 2020. Our goods in the UK marketplace. I mentioned the fact that we have unfettered access for goods, for GB goods, for Northern Ireland goods into the GB marketplace. So right now there's absolutely no controls at all between between Northern Ireland and GB at our ports. But that will change, and it's likely to change over the summer. So at this point in time, you could send goods from Cork via Larne across to GB, and it won't have those controls. But the intention here is that only Northern Ireland qualifying goods will have that right. So come the summer, the UK will be putting in place some additional bureaucracy, some additional administration to actually justify that the goods that are travelling from Northern Ireland ports into GB actually have that right as qualifying goods. So they're not Irish goods, they're not EU goods, they're not rest of the world goods that are travelling through Ireland and using an open door into GB. So the freedom that exists currently on those routes is about to, in the next number of months, is about to be put under control. So, but what it does mean for Northern Ireland qualifying goods themselves is that there are no export declarations. There's also no exit summary declarations. There's no import declarations on arrival into GB, no customs duties, VAT at the point of entry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's some limited exceptions around highly controlled, internationally controlled goods like explosives and blood diamonds and whatever else. But and to all intents and purposes, anything that's made in Northern Ireland can freely travel and have unfettered access into the Great British market. On an EU side, as I mentioned, our goods can freely circulate within the EU. So if you're moving goods between Northern Ireland and the EU, again, there should be no checks or processes, customs reliefs or duties or tariffs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we maintain that regulatory alignment. And what's that meant in practice? So on the top line, so these are numbers from the CSO in Ireland. And they're for, I think it's January and February of 2021. And what it's already shown is that there's a massive shift underway in terms of the economic relationship between the island of Ireland and GB, and a big shift underway in terms of the relationship and the trade flows within the island of Ireland as well. So what the CSO have published is that goods imported from Britain have halved essentially, or sorry, there's 53% decline in those in the first couple of months of this year. But in countering that, imports from Northern Ireland into the Republic of Ireland have almost doubled. So I think February was very close to being a record month in terms of goods traveling from Northern Ireland into the rest of the island of Ireland. So as Irish consumers and businesses struggle with what Brexit means for them, struggle in terms of the UK as being a centre of distribution for this part of Europe, they've looked elsewhere for those goods. We've seen lots of realignment in terms of the transport routes off the island of Ireland, but there's also larger amounts of trade happening north and south, and indeed south to north as well. In terms of Irish exports, they're down 11%. So that's a big difference in terms of those imports. So minus 53 versus minus 11%. But there's a reason for that, and it's back to the point I made earlier, which is the UK at this point in time has still to implement its import controls for goods arriving into the UK. It effectively has an open door at this point in time. Irish exports into Northern Ireland, again, those are increasing quite significantly. So you can see just from those numbers from January and February that businesses and consumers have changed in their behaviour and changing the routes in terms of the supply chain pretty rapidly. But this hasn't been a rosy picture in any senses at all for businesses in Northern Ireland. And these are the kind of survey results that we've yet to publish, that will be published next week, but I thought I would use some of the data available from those slides, or from those surveys with you this evening. And as you can see from that slide, people have experienced quite significant disruption over the first 3 months of this year. Thankfully, lots of people are on top of them. Thankfully, some people have experienced no impact whatsoever. And thankfully, people see some light at the end of the tunnel. However, quite clearly, a third of all Northern Irish manufacturers continue to experience quite significant disruption, and they believe that this likely is to persist. And this is largely centered on the challenge of what's known as at-risk goods. We have a scenario where the Trade and Cooperation Agreement between the UK and the EU really doesn't benefit Northern Ireland in any significant way. If I take the humble tomato as an example, a Spanish tomato leaving Spain can arrive in GB and be there tariff-free. But moving that then from a GB as a centre of distribution into Northern Ireland means that that tomato is then at risk of entering back into the EU and is then subject to tariffs and controls. The issue here is that GB, its position as a centre of distribution, is severely under threat. And as difficult as it has been to do Brexit and to change how people do business, because we've experienced a certain way of operating over 40 years, many of the relationships that are established between Northern Ireland and GB go back much, much longer than 40 years in terms of our membership of the EU. So lots of our supply is coming from GB, and those are viewed as being at risk in terms of going into the EU marketplace, and as such are subject to those potential tariffs. So we have a scenario where the TCA means that GB consumers can have tariff-free goods arriving from Europe, but because they've left Europe, Europe no longer has any interest in them, but arriving in Northern Ireland, they're suddenly getting interested again, and the tariff is applied. GB suppliers have been the single biggest problem that all companies in Northern Ireland have experienced. We'd have thought after 5 years of debate about Brexit that people would have known that there are going to be significant changes. Leaving the customs union and the single market comes with significant new burdens. But surprisingly, many GB suppliers paid no attention to the obligations that would be placed upon them come the 1st of January this year, both in terms of Brexit and the UK's relationship with the EU, but also specifically around the Northern Ireland Protocol. And more than half of manufacturers are saying that their GB suppliers are still 3 months later unprepared for dealing with Northern Ireland. Our biggest worry is that you can, over time, educate and prepare those people to continue to supply to you, but 1 in 5 of GB suppliers are no longer willing to supply into Northern Ireland at all. Now that's a worry for us, particularly as when we surveyed after 1 month, that number was in and around 13%. So that is now growing. The number of GB suppliers interested in supplying into Northern Ireland, and probably the island of Ireland as a whole, is significantly diminished. And when you lose that choice, you lose competitiveness. So we need to find some way to get that back on track again. But it's not all the UK's fault. There is continuing to be significant problems for Northern Ireland businesses with the EU. Thankfully, these challenges are diminishing somewhat as the EU are beginning to inform their authorities that goods from Northern Ireland are not the same as goods from the UK. But again, all our members are reporting that suppliers in the EU continue to be unaware, unwilling, or unprepared for supplying into Northern Ireland. Not at the same scale as in GB, but certainly issues remain and persist there. And again, whilst people think that these problems are there, they continue to be worried about this disruption likely to persist. Now, generally overall, people are quite positive about being on top of things, and things will be a bit better. They see opportunities that the protocol brings to their business, in particular, not just now, but in the longer term. But 4 out of 10 manufacturers continue to believe that that disruption that we're currently experiencing within the UK's marketplace is likely to persist. Having said all of that, what do they want to do about it? Well, the first thing they want to do is they want to make the protocol work. Despite all the narrative that you may hear from politicians and in the media and others, that the protocol is a disaster, etc., 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 our manufacturers actually believe that the protocol brings great opportunity for it, and the protocol must remain. So at about 17% of manufacturers at this point in time would like the protocol scrapped and replaced with something completely different. But the vast majority are basically saying it's here, it's the law, let's get on with it. We need some help to make it better. In my description, this is like getting a brand new pair of leather shoes. Sometimes it takes some time for that leather to soften, and sometimes your feet need to take new form in order to be comfortable and to remove that friction with that new pair of shoes. We need the UK and the EU's help in terms of softening that leather. We need to make sure that the protocol works for them and that business actually gets on and delivers the ambitions that are set out in the protocol for Northern Ireland. So in summary, supply chains are shifting, and they're shifting pretty rapidly. It's very visible in terms of those routes off the island of Ireland to continental Europe, but we are witnessing very significant change in a very short period in time. However, with all those challenges that are currently being experienced, there's a massive opportunity in terms of Northern Ireland being uniquely placed within the UK's market and the EU's market for goods. And that's borne out by our own personal experience. So right now we're dealing with 5 particular investment opportunities for Northern Ireland, quite significant amounts of money involved, well, hugely significant amounts of money involved, and quite a lot of jobs. And that's simply because of 2 things. One is market access, and 2, whilst we're at the wrong side of the customs border in some respects, we're actually on the right side in terms of the regulatory border. So if you want a location for your business, Northern Ireland's the place. Thank you.
And that's probably the most straightforward explanation of the impacts of Brexit that I've seen for the last 5 years. So thank you very much. That was very interesting. Just before I introduce our next speaker, please do continue to put your questions into the Q&A box, not the chat box, as I've been reminded. So thank you. So Frank Given, Frank is a member of the Northern Region Committee and a good friend. So Frank is founding director of Close Focus Limited, and he's the principal consultant there. Close Focus is a consultancy service specializing in technical compliance, sustainability and safety. They offer cross-sector tendering support, expertise in the supply of goods and services, sales growth and business innovation. A bit of everything really there. So Frank has 20 plus years career experience. He won't tell us what the plus stands for, but this includes technical engineering, developing products for global healthcare and life sciences markets, commercial sales development in factory and process automation, UK and Ireland-wide training and consulting in global product compliance. Frank is a fellow of the UK Institute of Leadership and Management, and he's an active member of the Northern Region Committee, as I mentioned. He lives on the Ards Peninsula, and he has an enormous dog, a Great Dane called Phoebe. So over to you, Frank. Tell us about Brexit and supply chains for services.
Denise, thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. And thank you to Stephen for a really, really interesting talk, as always. It's always a pleasure to hear Stephen's thoughts on these things. It's really well read and very well versed. So thank you for that. And indeed, thanks for Maurice as well. Appreciate it. So, opportunity knocks. Part of this talk is a little bit about my engagement with businesses across the island of Ireland, but particularly in Northern Ireland, and also my own journey as a service provider and as a services business. Because it's a little bit like anything else, you know, when you start getting involved in something which is quite technically quite complex and convoluted like Brexit, you find yourself in a position where you think, you know, physician, heal thyself. You've got to sort your own business out first before you can sort anyone else's out. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of that journey, some of my clients' journey, and also then what I consider to be the key areas that your kinds of businesses need to be looking at as we step into the future. Now, as Stephen rightly said, that the whole Brexit process was primarily focused around the trade in goods. And to be honest, the trade and services didn't get a look in, despite it being a significant part of the UK economy. I think it's something like roughly about 225 billion per year. This just wasn't, although at the start it was sort of kept up as being something that they wanted to have included, at the end of it, it just didn't get there. So first of all, let's have a little look at how a business might feel about this. And towards the start of the year, I was working on a project with a company in Belfast through one of the Belfast City Council schemes, and the owner of a sales distribution company for engineering products said, he put it this way: when he was thinking about Brexit, it was a bit like starting a race. And as you walk up to the start line, you see athletes to your left and athletes to your right. And when he looked at himself, he thought, I was dressed like a pantomime horse, completely unprepared, completely out of my league. And all I wanted to do was have an even start at it. So as a place to start, if you or your businesses are feeling a little bit overwhelmed about how Brexit is treating you, don't worry, because you're not alone in that. The way in which this has gone has been a shock to the system for a lot of people. There are a lot of new processes, a lot of new services involved, a lot of things that get your head around. But I don't want you to think that this is something that you're on your own as regards to your own business or your own company. And plenty of people out there are feeling the same way. Now, some people have got on with it and dealt with it, but some people I still find are trying to keep their head in the sand and maybe a little bit at sea about the whole thing. So Brexit and services. So is it just an awful lot of noise? And is it not just something that's really impacting financial services? Well, in the broadest sense, no, it's still affecting smaller businesses. It's still affecting medium-sized businesses, people services. It's such a broad area to look at. These are areas that we're thinking about in terms of cross-border trade, in terms of cabotage, in terms of distribution, logistics. Those are all services in their own rights, and they all have their own unique challenges. So let's take it from the simplest point, and let's take it back to something simple like business services like mine. Now, to do that, we've got to go back in time a little bit, and no better way to do that in Northern Ireland than a DeLorean. So in my business, going back to 2017, when I got involved in the Brexit process as an advisor, I was looking at my own business and thinking, how is this going to affect things that I get involved with, things that I deal with? And the first one that jumped out at me, funny enough, was product compliance. It was the one glaring thing that people weren't talking about. Back in 2017, people were talking about tax and VAT and about legal implications, but nobody's talking about the detail, particularly around engineering products. Armed with a bit of very discrete information about how product compliance worked, I set about trying to find out if there was an opportunity to get involved in the Brexit conversation and maybe bring it to the fore. And at that point, I sort of got involved with Engineers Ireland as an advisor. It was very, very early days at that point. And to be honest with you, right back then, people were really only starting to get a grips with what this actually meant to their business. We're still at the stage whereby it was a will they, won't they scenario. There's still those false starts we had in terms of when the exit date was going to happen. And that's how it was for so long. But take that aside, what I found as a business consultant was it allowed me and afforded me the opportunity to go out there and learn about new processes, learn about what other aspects of the EU exit were going to impact people. And from an opportunistic point of view, I was able to do that a little bit. It's a point where you take on little projects that you wouldn't normally take on, but also use that information to build upon your own skill set, understand new skills and techniques, take on new knowledge, and try and get my head around this overall system and how it was going to work for me ultimately. And with that in mind, I kind of took a little bit of an opportunity with it. And what I wanted to do with that was help other businesses take that opportunity too. So where do we start? So in my own head, and indeed with my clients, I sort of broke it down into a couple of key questions that you ask yourself. So as a business, the big things that were going to hit people weren't things like tax or VAT or basically product compliance or the discrete technical areas that I was thinking about. What businesses were asking me was, what kind of market access am I going to get? Does this make me more or less competitive when I go into that market? And ultimately, how can I position myself to benefit from the disruption? And I'll give you a little bit of an example of that. We were working with an engineering company in Portadown, and they were based all island. But their biggest pressure point was incoming competition from GB and from mainland Europe. Now, not by default, certainly, but certainly by a fluke, the owner had bought a services company based in Cork to do service and maintenance on his equipment. So we already had an establishment set up in the Republic of Ireland, which at that point made him uniquely positioned through all the Brexit talk and the discussion about it, it was basically a way you could say, well, here we are here in Northern Ireland, here we are here in the Republic of Ireland. No matter which way the Brexit scenario goes, we'll always be there to support our customers. Can you say that of our competition? And in one fell swoop, he was able to basically ask a very pointed question of all his competitors and force them in a position where they had to respond. It was one of those unique positions whereby somebody was just in the right place at the right time and opportunity knocked for them as a services company. But that's not the only issue. There are, of course, a number of different trade barriers that were set up as a result of Brexit, and these are ones we can't ignore. The first one, of course, has been said before, is market access. Do we have that access that we need? The other ones, of course, recognition, particularly around qualifications, particularly in the profession side of it. Establishment, can I and do I need to establish in another jurisdiction? Scrutiny or taxation, which is very important. The idea around visas, which is very important, not so much in the island of Ireland, but or within the UK and Ireland context, but if you start going into mainland Europe, it is an actual a requirement. And then, of course, at the end of it, there's things like data flows and storage. These are all things that have been teased out as the process is unfolded. So in broad terms, the higher the level of regulation for a service, the more stringent the barriers. And the more convoluted the supply chain and where you sit in it, the more questions you're going to be asked by your customers. So market access, what does it mean? Well, essentially from a business point of view, it's how you do what you do, how you deliver your business to your client. So you can deliver it remotely, as we're doing now. The customer may travel to you. Say, for example, if you're running a training company and you're bringing someone across border to enjoy one of your courses or programs, you have a commercial presence in that jurisdiction. You've set up a distribution center, you've set up another office, or you have a temporary presence. For example, if you're going in a construction firm to do a job of work over a number of months or indeed years on a construction site. Then we move on to things like recognition. So things like RMI certifications still accepted. We often think of that in terms of professional qualifications, licenses, certifications, accreditations, but it's not just professional qualifications. Things like machinery licenses, license to operate, competency certifications that may be held up within a European framework, accreditation of those certifications, and also things like safety and policy checks. Part of the work I do involves working with young people, and those safety and policy checks are vital for me to continue to do that. Also, what happens when existing certifications expire? What happens when you can't do it anymore? If I need to recertify, how am I going to do that? And where am I going to do that? And what are the insurance and liability implications if I don't? Because it's not like people are going to be standing at the border asking to see your credentials. But from an insurance and liability perspective, if you don't have your certifications and your qualifications in place, then you may not be insured. And in fact, the chances are you won't be. The establishment question comes in as well. We mentioned at the start of our talk that our client at that point was quite fortunate in that he had bought a company in Ireland. So he was able to restructure his business in that sense, but not everyone has that opportunity. Not everyone has that option. At this moment in time, establishing a business or a business from NI in Ireland is actually quite difficult and time consuming. At this point, could you set up a subsidiary, which needs a far greater degree of capitalization? When you go across the border to do that, are the bonds in place? Do you have enough money to do that? Can you physically adjust your corporate structure to do that? What are those requirements that you need to think about when you're doing it? And as well as that there, we're trying to figure out will local competitors enjoy an advantage. We all know the same, sometimes things when they're not made here, people sometimes want to buy local. We all know how that works. I think from my perspective, I've seen it whereby a local presence can actually give you a really fantastic advantage in the local market. Again, we go into scrutiny and taxation, and I'm not an accountant, but I will say that what level of business will you be required to, or what level of information will be required to give to a government body? Will that be more? more than likely, what audit or taxation and VAT requirements are going to be. These are things that are going to sit in the background, and with these sorts of areas, you really do need to get serious professional help to get that done. I know I've spent a lot of time with my accountant to make sure that we're established in the right way and that we've got a lot of backups to make sure that we are compliant with local regulations for when we go into new markets. And then, of course, we talk about visas and data. Of course, most companies in Northern Ireland and Ireland don't just sell to, particularly engineering companies, don't just sell cross-border, they sell across international borders as well. And this is where it becomes quite tricky, because in services provision, particularly when we're outside of the EU, it's up to the local country, each member state in that sense, to make their own rules about what they want and what they will and will not accept. So thinking about the eligibility of UK staff to keep moving, particularly within mainland EU, not so much in Ireland and Great Britain because of the agreement that's in place for that there. But that's one of those things when you start moving into somewhere like France, it gets a little bit trickier. And of course, there's obviously a difference between going there on holiday and, of course, being able to do a job of work. So that's scoping versus delivery. And how many EU member states can your staff visit before basically they have to establish in a European country? And that's a bit of a difficult one that we've had when we were looking at how much work can we do in Ireland before we have to start seriously thinking about registering there as a business. And then, of course, there's one at the end, which hopefully will be addressed within the next couple of months, but it's data and GDPR in terms of things like adequacy decisions and who's responsible for what information. Do we need to have a representative in the EU, depending on what type of information we have? What cost will that involve? Will we have to rewrite our contracts in regards to standard contractual clauses, which are very important associated with that? What format does that take and how much effort is involved in it? So just to give you a little bit of a recap, and think of it sometimes from the buyer's perspective. First of all, market access. If I was a buyer thinking of someone coming in from another country, I would be thinking, are you allowed to sell this service in this country to my people? Think of it also from a national treatment perspective. Do I treat your firm in the same way as I do my local competitors, or can I give a preferential treatment? Then recognition. Do I accept your qualification as sufficient to practice in my country? And again, don't just think of this as a European-wide issue, think of it by individual member state, so country to country perspective. Also want to think about two big existential questions to ponder. How, or indeed will, the EU strip back UK services access over time in order to make the EU 27 more competitive? Think about it this way, while we're all part of the big club, it was actually quite cordial in a competitive sense. But now that the UK is out of that club, it is pretty much a highly competitive market. So will the EU 27 do more to protect its own internal market, particularly in services? And of course, thinking about the island of Ireland, will the drive for increased services trade push for a form of parity in the services sector? Will that start to creep back in the other direction? And can you compete without it? Because in certain sectors, I don't see it so much as a barrier, I just see it as an advantage. And here it takes us right the way back to the beginning. Ultimately, how will this impact your individual business? Do you have more or less access? And does this make you more or less competitive in your market? And of course, how can you position yourself to benefit from what is obviously a very significant disruption? No matter which way you look at this, whatever you do when you get to the starting point, don't be dressed as the pantomime donkey. Denise, over to you.
Thank you, Frank. I hope I've turned off my mute button this time. It seems, Frank, there's a huge amount of questions for businesses to answer there, and that Brexit has certainly thrown up a lot of opportunities for businesses to look at how they operate and how they work. if we get our panel members here to come back online, and we can kick off the Q&A session. So again, if anyone wants to raise any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll start moving through these questions. I've been collating a list here as they're coming in. So I think really I'll kick off with a question that is probably for everyone, and I'm going to admit this is my question, but a key interest of mine, and particularly in the construction industry, is around skills shortages, and it's something that in Northern Ireland that we suffer from quite a bit. We have a long history of exporting our skilled people really to other jurisdictions. But is this something that's been impacted by Brexit? Are we seeing any evidence of it? And is it likely to be a bigger issue in other sectors? Stephen, do you want to kick off there?
Sure. There's a series of factors kind of aligning all at the one time. So you definitely have a Brexit issue in terms of we don't have the free movement of labour. It's just a free movement of goods. So those EU nationals that came to Northern Ireland and set up home here and contributed to not only our businesses but our communities, a lot of those are leaving and have gone, either some have gone over the border, but most have actually gone back home because their own economies have been doing pretty well, and their skills are required there. And we can't replace those with other EU nationals. We have to operate through a new migration regime, which is much more complex. It's based on shortages of skills, but also salary levels and qualifications and ability to speak the language, etc., etc., etc. The Brexiteers claim that this is a better place to be because you can bring skills in from all over the world a lot easier. That may well be the case, but we have an issue here and now that we want to address. The second thing that's happening is that UK introduced a furlough scheme as part of its response to COVID. And what it's meant is that a lot of people are in suspended animation when it comes to their jobs. I think at one point, about 1 in 8 of all workers in Northern Ireland were on furlough. And bear in mind that a third of all those working in the North are in public services. I'd take 100,000 people out of, or 120,000 people out of the private sector. It's quite a significant amount of people. But ordinarily, those people would have been in firms that, just by the natural course of births and deaths of businesses, those people may have moved around, that have gone to different firms. Their businesses that they were in may have collapsed. They may be seeing an opportunity for a better job, or even the opposite, some less hours or whatever. There was a kind of natural movement of people around the workforce, but furlough has meant that those people have been propped up at home, sadly on only 80% of their wages, but they haven't lost their job. So that circulation of people in the workforce hasn't been happening. And then the last thing I'll say is a kind of cultural piece, is that whenever, and I have an 18-year-old son here, and as naturally as parents, you'll go, well, he has to be a doctor because I need someone to care for me when I'm at that age. Or he'll be an accountant or a solicitor or
an engineer.
Yeah. So the kind of natural thing, or a teacher. We train 3 times as many teachers as we need here for some reason. But I think those are cultural issues. The reality is that a welder in County Tyrone is earning almost double every hour what a barrister is earning in Belfast at the moment. The salary levels, particularly in and around engineering, are better than some of the professions in Northern Ireland at the moment. But when a factory goes pop, it goes pop very, very visibly. And we've lost a few of those over the last number of years, whether those are JTI or Michelin or 1 or 2 others. And when it goes big. And that kind of drop of jobs going that you may see in other sectors isn't as visible as all of that. So there's a confidence issue as parents looking in and going, careers in manufacturing must be a sunset industry. It's middle-aged men with eating sandwiches with dirty hands and boiler suits, etc., etc., etc. It's quite the opposite from that. Some of the most extraordinary businesses, the most advanced technical businesses you've ever come across on these islands are in manufacturing and in engineering, parts of manufacturing in particular. So there's a perception issue, there's an attractiveness issue, which has also resulted in that issue around skills. And particularly when it comes to female participation in the manufacturing workforce. I think some survey work done by Pinsent Masons, the UK international actually law firm, said that only 9% of females would consider a career in manufacturing. So whilst our sector's talking about a shortage of labour, not just a shortage of skills, but a shortage of labour, but they're only speaking to half the workforce effectively, or the potential workforce. So there's a big piece of work to be done, not by government, but by manufacturers themselves, to actually talk about these incredible careers that people can have in our manufacturing community, and particularly in that engineering side, which we excel on globally.
I think there's a bit of crossover there with engineering, very much so. I'm off to get my welding certification after hearing that. Frank, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in terms of skills. And you'd mentioned, things around travel restrictions, and I presume for going on holidays to Spain, it's quite different than going to work in Spain. Or is there any issues around that? Has remote working opened things up, or has it made things a little bit more complicated in terms of the rules are a little bit more blurry?
I think if you can deliver remotely, you're in a better position than if you have to deliver on site. I know I was working with a couple of companies. I'll just give you as an example. It's almost like a tale of two companies doing the same thing, basically in the same area, same technical area, delivering the same kind of service, but to different countries. One went to France and one went to the Republic of Ireland for a longer term job, and both companies we were working with around about the same time, and it was the visa requirement that was going to hit the French company, whereas the company going to the south of Ireland was very much, they knew what they had to do. They knew how long they could be there. They knew they could nip back. They could rotate people into different jobs to make sure that if there was any issue, and this was pre-exit time, if there was any issue, that it was going to be handled very quickly and very easily. And that was over a multi-year program or a multi-year project. Whereas if you have to have dedicated people in another country, then it's almost like, could you not just hire someone local? Which adds an increased burden and increased cost requirement. It means you have to partner with different people, and it just makes your life a whole lot more complex. And if you've priced a job early on without that thinking, then you've got a serious problem, because then you've got all this extra cost involved. And that was the sort of conversations and certainly I was having with clients about that extra bit of movement. It wasn't around skills and qualification as such. It was actually around your ability to go there and deliver that or that service to them. The other side, and pick up what Stephen said on that side of it, I do a little bit of work with our local council on through one of the skills and employability forums, and there are new pathways opening up for people to come into the likes of the profession, whether it's engineering, indeed professions, and through likes of modern apprenticeships and that side of it. One of the things I would say is it's very broad, so people are starting to get that choice back. So I think it's incumbent on the engineering profession to really put itself out there as being the place for people with an aptitude or interest in that area, to be able to pick them out very, very quickly and very early and say, actually, this is a really good opportunity for you, and look what you can achieve when you're here. I know my experience of going into schools when we still could do that with the likes of Young Enterprise and that, the response I got from not just students but also parents was that we didn't think that was available, and we had a very particular viewpoint on apprenticeships, for example, that maybe haven't been pushed through and maybe hasn't been addressed with kids, to let them see that those opportunities are there, and they're actually really, really good and really brilliant opportunities. I mean, when I was growing up, and this again shows my age, your apprenticeships were really limited to, joinery, bricklaying, plumbing. Maybe if you were good at maths, you could become a spark or an electrician. And if you knew someone, you could be a mechanic. That was kind of it, in the apprenticeship side. Whereas now there's such the wealth of stuff that's out there for people, the choice that's available to them. But again, that will then dilute the market a little bit, but hopefully raise people's expectations of what they can get involved in and the pathways to get there.
Very good, very good. I suppose this one for Maurice and maybe Stephen. Stephen, you'd mentioned that Northern Ireland, goods now have unfettered access to UK and really to Europe. But what opportunities do you think that this is going to bring for Northern Ireland, and are we seeing any benefits or even problems with that already?
So because this is centered on the movement of goods, what it's meant is that internationally, Northern Ireland has an attention that it's not had in generations, frankly. And Invest Northern Ireland, who are enterprise agency here in the north, obviously, they are receiving inquiries from bicycle manufacturers in New Zealand, technology companies in the US. I'm dealing, as they are, with a company looking to establish manufacturing of lateral flow tests, which are going to be part of our lives going forward. And the common theme for all of those companies is market access and being on the right side of the regulatory border. Invest NI have challenges, I suppose, in terms of their minister's approach to, or their minister's perception of what Brexit means and what Brexit has ended up. But despite that, they're out in the marketplace, spend hundreds of thousands of pounds talking to companies and taking them through the opportunity that exists here. If I talk about one specific opportunity that I'm dealing with, is around about £100 million investment in the technology area, 500 plus jobs. If they had 300,000 square feet today, they would take it. We don't have 300,000 square feet of factory space in one site, one location currently available. There's a great documentary about DeLorean. Frank used that beautiful image of one earlier. These are the types of scale of facilities that these guys are interested in, and they need to get there. What I would add to it is that in order to stimulate investment, the UK government introduced what is known as a super deduction in the budget. So basically, for every pound you spend on a capital investment in this current financial year and the next financial year, you get £1.30 written back off in terms of tax. So you're basically getting £2.30 tax-free in capital investments. And what that has done is it's also, so that combined with our free circulation of goods has meant that people in our engineering sector have order books going right into next year. So I know of one local company in the kind of crushing and screening industry, and they're taking orders right now, but they're saying to customers it's going to be May 2022 at the earliest before you're on our roster for producing these goods for you. So there is a massive kind of opportunity here for us that has been recognized by customers, but also been recognized by investors.
Sounds very positive. Maurice, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah,
I know the context of opportunity quite excites you for when it comes to Brexit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would fully agree with what Stephen is saying there in terms of the opportunities for investment in Northern Ireland. You know, once we get past the current difficulties implementing protocols and everything settling down, there's no doubt about it that Northern Ireland is going to be a hugely attractive location for inward investment. And I think, you know, you can see that happening already. And I mean, I remember, for example, I mentioned it before we started, I worked in Northern Ireland in the 1980s. And at that stage, the IDB, the predecessor of Invest Northern Ireland, were really attracting a lot of international business. But then the rules of the game changed over the period, and Southern Ireland did very well, maybe had tax advantages. But right now, in the south of Ireland, certainly, we would be looking at the tax advantage eroding very quickly with Joe Biden and his new initiatives and the OECD initiatives. So at the exact same time then, Northern Ireland has this incredible advantage really of full access to the EU and to the very large UK market. So I think it's a fabulous opportunity and one to develop. And of course, it comes back to your first question. You're going to need people, you're going to need skills to support that. There is free movement in the island of Ireland, which is great. And I think there will be great opportunity, not just for the 6 counties in Northern Ireland, but also for the bordering areas in Southern Ireland. I think there'll be even more cross-border movement for work and for living than there is at the moment. And just on that point about skills, just to take a slightly broader context relevant for us in Engineers Ireland, I think is technology. So there's huge changes going to happen, societal changes after the pandemic. Things are just not going to be as they are. You mentioned yourself remote working. There'll be some sectors of the economy that will be very slow to recover. So there's opportunities to retrain people from those sectors into sectors like construction, where I think there will be a very high demand, and in manufacturing and to support inward investment. But there's also technology. So for example, in construction, and we would be in the OPW very involved in this, BIM, Building Information Management, is a huge sea change. Now the UK is very advanced in this. Ireland and many European countries not so, but it is an opportunity to introduce new technology, and it's easier then for people coming from outside of construction to get involved, because the insiders maybe are coming to terms with new technology, so they're not at the same disadvantage. So there's enormous changes happening, Denise, and really it's about being alert and taking advantage of them, and making sure the obstacles we're seeing at the moment don't compound us or don't block us. And we just will have the floor to mention one of those that's really important at the moment in construction, and you may be aware of this, and that is professional indemnity insurance. For consultants has become all of a sudden a huge issue, and partly that's because of Grenville and the inquiry going on at the moment, and the particular focus on fire safety issues and ensuring consultants certifying fire safety. But that's compounded by, and this is Frank's area, of the changes in the service industry post-Brexit. So the UK is very strong in insurance and reinsurance, but a lot of those services are not as readily available in Ireland and in other European countries now, and it's going to take some time for the market to rebalance. But in the short term, it's created a huge blockage that you could have tenders for tens of millions of pounds or euro blocked because you just can't get a 3-person fire safety consultant company who have the necessary insurance to do the work. So we've got to get through blockages like that.
That's a very good point about insurance, Maurice, actually, and you know, a number of the Northern Region members have been raising concerns with me around, you know, the costs now associated with insurance and that, and we are taking steps to address that through government procurement, and you know, I'm liaising with government departments to try and figure out ways to ease the burden. And I know certainly through my work with the Construction Industry Council that we're looking at figuring out exactly what the cause of the problem is. And you mentioned Grenfell; it was one of the key, you know, key causes to it. But it's a huge concern to construction industry in particular. Yeah. So one of the questions is coming up repeatedly, and I suppose it's a hot topic at the minute in the media, is around the Northern Ireland Protocol and what changes are necessary and what changes are likely. And it'd be interesting to hear from Stephen and Frank in terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol, in terms of, you know, goods and services separately. What changes do you think need to happen, if any, and do you think changes are likely at this stage? Do you want to take that first, Stephen?
Okay, I was waiting for Frank to go first there. So we are directly engaged with both the UK government and indeed the EU itself through this joint committee. So last week we met with the specialised committee, which is the committee jointly chaired by both the UK and the EU, but it does the kind of technical work. And we met with, previous to that, we met with the joint committee. So it was Michael Gove and Vice President Šefčovič. And if we summarised it, it's four things. The first thing is stability. So we asked them to ensure that the disruptions that we were experiencing, the time was given to allow firms to prepare for what's necessary for some of that stuff. Now, that was a request specifically on extending some of those grace periods, which they didn't come to agreement on, and the UK then took unilateral action on. But at least that provided some stability in terms of an operating model at that point in time. Obviously, there's less stability on the streets, or there was less stability on the streets. It's all calmed down now, but it did provide us with that stability to allow businesses to prepare. So the first thing was stability. Following on from stability is certainty. So whilst you're dealing with the short term and finding solutions to that stuff, what does the long term actually look like? So what do we need to do to ensure that those frictions that the food industry in particular, supermarkets are experiencing, that those problems are overcome in the long term? So what are the projects, systems, processes, procedures we need to put in place that provides the certainty in the longer term? So on top of stability and certainty, then you have simplicity. And the problem that we have is that we have, between Larne and Cairn Ryan, one of the most extreme borders anywhere in the EU, to be honest. With 3 times as many SPS certificates than the entire external border of the EU, just in that route. And part of that is by design, part of that is by a lack of trust, part of that is by our tax authorities and others taking a technocratic approach to these things in order to build a body of evidence. But we need to make that process of moving goods from GB into Northern Ireland as simple as we possibly can. And it hasn't been simple at all for the first few months. It largely centres on that issue of at-risk goods that I mentioned earlier. Why the EU would be interested, never mind, look for the data on goods that are coming into Northern Ireland, that are staying in Northern Ireland or going back into GB, and requiring full customs declarations on that is a mystery to us all. So we need that simplicity there. So on top of stability, certainty, and simplicity, the last piece is affordability. And what's coming at us and what we've experienced so far is quite significant costs of moving stuff from GB into NI, not just in terms of cash terms, because there is a cash cost to that in terms of paying additional transportation costs, customs expertise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also costs within firms who've had to appoint and train staff themselves, massive time being expended to try to get up to speed on stuff, and the opportunity lost in terms of those people being put onto really productive uses. Instead, they're dealing with stupid paperwork stuff. So for us, it is about stability, certainty, simplicity, and affordability. And we've given ideas based in EU union law to both sides to show them where those improvements can be made.
Very good. Frank, do you want to add anything?
Obviously, from the services side, it's, if anything does happen on the services side, it's going to be piecemeal throughout that. What I have noticed as well is that there's, it'll be piecemeal over time. If anything does come off the services side, any agreements that are made. What I would say is that there's been a lot of services that have sprung up as a result of this to try and meet that demand, whether trying to get people involved in customs brokerage, people trained up on how to do that. We've seen a lot of companies, certainly companies I've worked with, have tried to retrain and reskill, upskill some of their staff to be able to manage this process. And as Stephen rightly said, it's a lot of time and effort to try and get someone up to speed on something which is a really complex process if you've never dealt with it before. Fine, once you've got a few under your belt, it starts to make a bit more sense. But that period of time it takes to get people up to speed is what's causing a lot of friction within the businesses. And most businesses don't have the capacity to deal with it, to be perfectly honest with you. They're running light as it is and have been for some time. I agree with Stephen. I think we need a lot more simplicity in the processes we're dealing with in getting goods back and forward. There are some what I would call unique cases or highly specialized cases where goods have had to find new and alternative routes into the European market, and the increase in cost in those. We had one last week, which was their normal route out of Northern Ireland directly in through GB and then on to mainland Europe, taking out in through a direct route which needed to go via Dublin with double the price. You know, that's a lot. And when you think about that, it's putting an unbelievable pressure on businesses. They're already being squeezed on price for their goods because of the way in which they have to route products in through to a different market, and it's unnecessary.
Unnecessary, right? Okay, I'm very conscious of time. We're already 20 minutes over, but we've got a lot of questions coming in. One final one. If I could ask you all to give what's the key question that a business should ask of their suppliers? If I could ask you to give some advice to our listeners. So who wants to kick that off? Frank, I'll pick on you this time because
it comes back down to what's the key big issue for that business. I think from an engineering perspective, and if you look at it that way, particularly in terms of products and indeed services come through, I'd be looking at compliance. So I'll be looking at the compliance question. It's been one that's been sitting in the background, and I know Maurice alluded to it, and Stephen has as well. But I'll be looking at things like product certification, people compliance in terms of their skill sets, that side of it. And I'd be asking that to make sure that my suppliers are up to speed on that and they know exactly what they have to do. And I'd be checking it. Because the last thing you want is, the last thing you guys want is if you're taking products in from GB and steelwork and the bridge in just outside of Dublin, is to find out that your products aren't technically certified.
Yeah, Maurice, have you anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that point about compliance certification. The rules have changed, so as Frank says, to in the short term, just make sure that your suppliers are alert to the changes and have complied, because you know, Stephen showed slides there. There's a lack of awareness throughout Europe and throughout the UK as well of the rule changes. A lot of businesses only have a small amount of business affected. So it can be that you as the end user are the one who pays the price, because as Frank says, you're the one who discovers halfway through a project that what your supplier is supplying isn't quite correct. I'd also say to look beyond the first layer of supply and the first product. Stephen had indicated that in his presentation. It's quite complicated, and I think nobody foresaw this level of complication. Goods that arrive in the UK from Europe, somewhere in Europe. I forget your example. Was it a tomato you said to Stephen that you know, and maybe it's repackaged or something very modest happens to it, and then suddenly it becomes subject to a tariff. So you might have to go back a couple of layers in the supply chain. And it's not just all about Brexit either. I mean, the coronavirus has changed the ground rules on globalization and global trade, and you've got the whole issue between the US and China. So even if you're in high-tech industries, and you know, some of the companies that are not approved anymore as sub-suppliers for electronics, there's a lot of changes in the global supply environment for goods. And I wouldn't be as familiar with services as Frank is, but once again, you know, challenges, but everywhere there's a challenge, there's an opportunity, and who's best at using opportunities but engineers.
That's true, very true. Stephen, have you anything you want to add, a key question for businesses to ask?
It's maybe something for a future hour and a half for your membership. But
well, I'll have to cut you off there now.
and I can smell my dinner burning already, so it's not tonight. But Frank has mentioned something which is critically important and is actually a bit of a time bomb sitting under us all at the moment, which is the whole issue of the origin of the goods that we're using as components or raw materials or whatever else. The rules on origin in the TCA that the UK and the EU agreed are some of the weakest, wateriest rules that you could come across. And people are sitting there probably with a big tariff risk, and they just don't realize it because this has the detail hasn't followed the movement until this point, largely. So that issue of the origin of the goods, have third country goods been through sufficient processing in order to change the origin so they can travel tariff free or not? That's a problem that I would say that every business in Ireland, north and south, don't really have much sight of at this point in time. That's going to come back and bite us all.
Good point. I suppose there's opportunity in there as well for businesses that, as you say, Maurice, to capitalize on that. If you're looking into your supply chains, there's other things to start looking at while you're at it. Modern slavery laws and sustainability and environmental considerations. So it's an opportunity for businesses, I suppose, to fully peel back all the layers. Where perhaps they may not have had full oversight previously, but I think we'll leave it there for now, and because I'm very conscious of the time. We've gone 25 minutes over. I certainly have. This has been the most interesting conversation I've had about Brexit, the most practical one. I would like to say thanks to all our speakers, to Stephen and Frank and Maurice. It was an honour to have you here tonight, and a pleasure to chair this panel discussion. So thank you all. And I guess we'll leave it there. I think the final point I'll add is that the theme that keeps coming across tonight is that there's buckets of opportunity out there, and we need to get out there and tell everybody about Northern Ireland and tell everybody about the opportunity that exists in Northern Ireland, and start breaking down some of the barriers and the perceptions. And we're open for business, I guess, is really what keeps coming across. That's good news. So thank you all. Let's leave it there. All the best.